Welcome to this HR Indaba Network webinar in partnership with Henley Business School. I'm Georgina Geddes. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of CHRO South Africa, and I'm your host for this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about lockdown fatigue. It's a real phenomenon. We've all been at this for a while now, and in South Africa, we've just entered into our third hard lockdown. It's really hard to find the energy levels to sustain motivation in these tough times. In that first year, although we were all scared, we were also motivated to make things work and keep things going, and to find new solutions for problems we'd never imagined we'd face. A year and a bit down the line, we just don't have the same energy for this. Are any businesses still having those funky hat Fridays? But the imperative to survive this, to keep our businesses going and our professional relationships intact, and to keep our staff safe, healthy, and happy are just as important now as it was last year. So to give us all a bit of a reset, I'm joined by three excellent speakers who will hopefully give us a bit of vummer to keep us fighting lockdown fatigue. First of all, we have John Foster-Pedley, the Dean of Henley Business School Africa, who will reveal findings from his interactions with businesses around the world. He'll be giving us 7 skills for HR leaders in 2021. We'll also be hearing from Paula, Quinsee, relationship expert and author of 2 self-help guides on how to sustain positive professional relationships right now. And last but certainly not least, Mehnaaz Bux, a partner at Webber Wentzel and labor law specialist, who will unpack the legal incentive for sustaining safety measures in the workplace. So welcome to the three of you. And without any further ado, I would like to hand over to John, who's going to be telling us the 7 things that HR leaders need to know or do for this year. Can Paula and me and Mehnaaz, can we go off camera so that John can take the stage?
Thank you very much. That's marvelous, Georgina. So first, now I have to find the right buttons to press to share my presentation. And then I have to hope this goes on to full screen properly. Can you... I'm just going to go out of that again because I think it's jumped a little. Let's try that. Let's have a look. Can you see that first slide there okay?
It's all perfect, John.
Yes, and if I move it, does it move?
Yes.
Ah, wonderful. So hello, everybody.
Everything's doing what it should.
I'm really pleased to be able to chat to you. I'm going to put my timer on so I have some sort of approximation of keeping to my time. You know, these sort of professional speakers like Paula, they've got an inner time clock that just clicks away and does it for them. But I value my iPhone. So I'd really like to share something quite quickly in 15 minutes about 7 skills for leaders in 2021. And then my camera's a bit over here, so I'm just going to leave the camera there and I'll look to one side of it. Thank you. So this is really important. When we get to talk about dealing with COVID fatigue, I'd rather we handle that in questions. There's an awful lot going on about that now, which I'd love to engage with you on and share what we're doing. But anyway, so here are some skills I think are going to be important for HR leaders in 2021. 7 of them, here they are. One is make reality your friend and get off autopilot. Okay. The second one I think is big picture thinking. The third is build your own academy. Here I'm dean of a business school telling you to go and build your own academy, but I'll explain. Fourth thing is really understand safety as a system. You need to understand system thinking behind safety is really important. And then have substance in your voice. It's very easy to get shrill and talk about the things that worry us, but how do we actually end up having substance and being those people who are grounded and dealing with a lot of challenges without getting panicky in a sense? And how do we do that without faking it all the time? And actually we can do. And then the other one is embracing polarities, move away from either or thinking. And we'll just do a little experiment on that. And finally be normal. And I'll explain a little bit about that. So that's my thoughts about how to cope with what's going on now. So it's just an offering. And I fully believe in strong opinions, lightly held. So I'm quite happy to change my mind if you come up with a better argument. So let's go straight into the first one about making reality your friend, okay? And I really like this saying because, we tend to think when people say be realistic, they're normally bringing you down, oh, think of the worst thing. But realism is also about being visionary and being imaginative and having hope as well. That is part of reality. But you can't do that in a sort of Pollyannish dream way. We have to do it in a sensible way. Now, I used to be a pilot. And what you don't want is your pilots to be like the ones on your left. You don't want your pilots to be on autopilot, sleeping away while the machine drives itself. Even though you've got an autopilot, which is our habits, the way we're working. We've got to be observing our activities all the time. We have to be the monitor of all our own systems and what we're doing. Why are we just working on habits? Are we viewing what's around us and reinterpreting what's going on? Strong opinions, yes, lightly held. So when you get new data, you can change your mind, or new arguments. You can move into a richer understanding. So we've really got to monitor our habits, so we don't just go, glazed eyes into the future as a sort of automaton. Really important. And that's just a matter of practice and mindfulness and all those sort of disciplines we can do, having people check in on you and challenge you. We really believe in challenge at Henley. The other thing is conspiracy-proof your mind as well. It's so easy to fall. We got the vaccine coming in now. There's so many videos and things about the dangers of vax. My wife's a doctor. It's very clear what the science is. There are a few, 4 in a million, 8 in a million, or whatever it is, problems with some of the vaccine, but they're far less than the consequences by factors of 10, 100, 1,000 than the consequence of disease. So we have to really monitor your mind and don't get pulled into these conspiracy ways of thinking. They're very alluring for the mind. There's something about the way we construct it we just love. When we don't understand something, we have to create a reason, and it's normally a reason about somebody's done something evil. There's a thing called Hanlon's rule, which is that often things aren't because people are plotting an evil, simply due to it's just due to incompetence and disorganization. So conspiracy proof your mind, really important. Okay, the next one, big picture thinking. It's very easy to be looking down our feet, seeing 1,000,001 things, or looking at 1,000 symptoms. But how do we get up and see what the big pattern is? And I did some research on this, and I've got 4 offerings here that I think may help you. And I'm not saying they're right, but they're just a suggestion. I think there's 4 elements to big picture thinking that you can train. The first one is we need to learn to be detached. We have to have emotional control. We have to be dispassionate rather than passionate. Now, a lot of us fight against that. Oh no, I'm losing my soul. Everyone's so cold. But to see the big picture, a lot of fears come up, and we can respond to the fears. You've got to actually challenge your fears and see what's in front of you, even though it frightens you. That's important. The second thing on the right there, the right-hand part of that Venn diagram in front of you, is systems thinking. We need to think systemically, not you look at the units, this, and this. We have to look at how they influence each other, how 4 or 5 things influence each other. So we see the system. How do you make your kid happy? Give them an iPad? Well, probably not. There's probably about 10 things you do to make your kid happy, all of which you're never quite sure if any one of them work. But the right 10 together or 5 will make your kid happy, probably. Probably. At the bottom is the next thing, is while we're dispassionate and detached from one, the next thing is the capacity to visualize, to have imagination. Some people find this really hard, or we think imagination is somehow daydreaming or something valueless. It really isn't. The capacity to go beyond your logic and just detach what's chattering and see what the big picture might look like. Let your intuition pattern insights is really important. And we can practice that. So practice imagining, visualizing. And that voice in your head saying, oh, you're not being professional, you're being childish, ignore it. Learn to become a good visualizer. It's a hugely important senior management capability. How do you visualize the future of your organization? It's not just entirely rational. And on the left there is having a really strong sense of purpose. And I think that is really very important indeed to have purpose. So those are 4 elements you can work on for building your kind of big picture thinking. And then we think, how do we learn? Well, go and do an MBA. Yes, please do an MBA. But actually, you don't have to do an MBA. There are so many ways to learn in front of us, both from our colleagues, from online learning, from what you choose to read, from the engagements and fora that you think in, that you get involved in, the online sessions like this. They're all part of your own self-created academy. Take mastery of your own learning over this coming year. Do an MBA or whatever course you want to do if that's what you want to do. But then do 1,000,001 other things. Learn through reflection, learn through experience, have somebody to mentor you, have a challenge group. What you're trying to do is ramp up the pace of your learning this year from as many different ways as you can visualize or imagine, as well as think through. So take control of your learning, and this is a world of endless learning. And learn to be very good at that. Okay, So I've got about 7 minutes left, and I'm going to talk to you about this. Now, I was a pilot, and being a pilot, it really matters how you manage the environment around you, how you manage safety. And the big thing about pilots is they make lots of mistakes. And so do doctors. But the thing about pilots is that they know they make lots of mistakes, and they challenge the flight crew dynamics, and they challenge the systems. And when I say mistakes, they're such tiny mistakes you catch them. It's like riding a bicycle. You're never balanced. You're always balancing. You're always making minor corrections. So, you know, when you come out of balance. And that's how it is with pilots. You're very good at understanding things. You catch things early. And understanding how to be safe is a bit like this. There are 1,000,001 events that you can see. There are loads of patterns underlying those events. And there's underlying structures. You know, I was chair of a school. A kid fell off a balcony. And everyone, oh, wow, and everyone panicked. And then they said, what's the pattern underlying it? Oh, well, it looks like the teachers weren't there at that time. And so there was a gap left over, and that was a first floor balcony that the kids could fall off. So it was obvious that could have happened. And there was an underlying control pattern that could have avoided that in the first place. And then all the parents said, I always knew that was going to happen. It was obviously dangerous. But nobody ever shared that information with others. So the mindset was to observe that there was a safety problem, but not share it. Another mindset would have been, it's my accountability to be safe. Same with COVID. And I'm going to share with you every time. If you're not wearing a mask, I'm not just going to observe it. I'm going to say, please, will you wear a mask? And did you know the KN95 mask or the FFP3 mask has been shown yesterday by Addenbrooke Hospital to reduce the risk of actually getting COVID for nurses in a COVID ward to exactly the same risk as in a non-COVID ward. So wearing masks is essential. And so we see the underlying structures and mindsets that are really important. And obviously, the more you work on the top end there, you react, adapt, and plan. The more you work on the bottom end, the more you're preventing problems. And so you've got a lot more leverage when you work at the bottom, these sort of basic big ideas and mindset, rather than just reacting to 1,000 things, taking an aspirin when you have a headache instead of changing your lifestyle. And there are symptoms at the top and causes at the bottom. There's 100 symptoms, not very leveraged when you keep curing them. There's 15 patterns of behavior, and there's probably about 5 critical drivers. Change the way people deal with things, change the way people think about safety, change the way people think about each other and helping each other with safety. Not saying I can't tell people, I must tell people to help the community. And they are very high leverage. So learning how to understand system thinking and root causes, I think really helps. Okay, I've got 4 minutes, 52 seconds left. So I've got about 3 more slides. I'll just run through them. The first one is having substance in your voice. Now, I think this really matters because as leaders, we need to be able to speak in ways that people understand and move. So one of the ways we do this is to actually, sorry about the dogs if you can hear them. It's just, you know, it's lockdown-itis, isn't it? So we have to be able to speak from a stance of equality and not from being, you know, specially and different from anybody else. I'm just sending an email, a WhatsApp here to my people in the house to stop the dogs barking. This is a joy of presentations in lockdown. Okay, that maybe they will then imprison the dogs somewhere. So we need to be able to look at people straight in the eye and not think I'm a victim, we're lesser. It's having that sort of sense that we're all the same. The diversity is about fairness and cultivating that aspect. That's really important if you want to have substance in your voice. You don't patronize or be weak. The other thing, if you want substance, then you need to have the capacity to act because substance comes from results, not just rhetoric and philosophizing. It doesn't. If you want people to really be impressed with you and listen to you, then make sure you do things and make sure you get results, especially when it's hard to do it, like now. The other one is have a proper selfishness. So we wear our masks first, you know, because we want to protect ourselves. What's the point of wearing your oxygen, not putting your oxygen mask on an airplane when you can't help other people? So a proper selfish is looking after yourself, making sure you're thinking well, you're managing your mental health and your physical health, and you're looking after yourself. That's selfish, but in a good way. And the final thing is taking, if you want substance, take ownership of the end results. Always say, I'm sorry, it was my fault, or, you know, instead of saying, my team did it or that person did it, ultimately I'm accountable. I'm the boss, so I'm sorry, I apologize. I should have looked after my team better and informed them better. Then within the team, you can work out who's accountable. So don't shout and complain, don't get shrill, take a deep breath, move forward. You know, don't raise your voice, raise your argument, that sort of thing. I think that's a really important thing to do if you want to be a leader right now. The next one is not being bipolar, but is managing polarities. And I'm going to show you what this means. And it's a really simple way to understand this. And I hope you'll do it with me. So if you take a deep breath and breathe out, and don't breathe in, feel what happens. That's it. Now you want to breathe in, don't you? Okay, breathe in. Hold your breath. That's great. But then after a while, you really want to breathe out again because the CO2 is building up. Breathe out. Now, which is better, breathing in or breathing out? Are you a breather inner or a breather outer? Which is better? Well, obviously, you know, you're both. You know, it's a balanced combination. But what happens? Do we want stability or change? There are some people who are real breather outers. They just want stability. And stability brings you the upside of stability here. But you get the downside of stability, which is stagnation. You know, like you've breathed out. Oh, gosh, I haven't got any oxygen. I now desperately need oxygen. Oh, I breathe in new energy, new passion, new direction. Great. But then you hold your breath too long and you lose it all. It all becomes random and crazy. And the CO2 builds up and you have to breathe out again. So it's like that. So don't be a breather in it. If you're a breather in it, if you like stability, you'll only be looking at the downside of change. If you don't watch out, you'll see the negative. If you love change and new energy and somebody talks about stability, you won't see the top side here, you'll see the bottom side. So understand that everything is a dynamic balance. Don't think in polarities, think in and both. Dynamic balances between things. It's a really great thing to cultivate. Okay. And my last minute, I'm going to talk about this, which is being normal. In Denmark, they have a thing called a law of Jante. And it means this: when you walk into a room, you don't feel better than the people in a room. That I cannot be better than you. You are the. If you think of the 150, 200 people who are listening now, how can I be better than you, all of you? How can you be better than all of us? And we can't, of course. So that the collective, if you could connect all the insights of everyone into a sort of cyber brain there, imagine how wise and brilliant that brain would be. So as leaders, convening people, we're trying to connect insights of our team rather than creating these exceptional leaders. So I cannot be greater than you. So in fact, I am part of you. And that is my minute, just signing out. So look up the law of Jante and practice being normal. Stop trying to be exceptional. I know you're going to hate this. Don't be exceptional. Cultivate the fact that the normal human brain, normal human being has everything we need. The more we're trying to stand out and be special, I'm not saying don't do good work. The more I want to be better than you, the less I'm able to access your wisdom, we can work collectively. Great leaders work in the collective. They move them forward and they stimulate and create other great leaders. Thank you very much for listening.
John, that was great. Usually when people are speaking, I try to take down notes of the things that resonated with me so that I can kind of give a little informed comment, but it all resonated with me. So thank you very much. I think, and I loved the breathing exercise. So
again.
I hope everybody was doing that at home as well. Over to you, Paula, and then we'll jump off video again so that you can own the room. And we're looking forward to hearing your relationship insights of that great foundation. So thank you so much, John.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Georgina. Thanks, John. Always hard shoes to follow when I have to speak after you. I prefer speaking before you.
Me too. I prefer speaking before you for the same reason.
Welcome, everybody, and it's great to be here today. And I'm going to be sharing some insights around relationship fatigue. Now, first of all, when we hear the word relationship, we automatically default to thinking romantic relationships. We don't think about relationships in the workplace. And that's kind of because we use different terminology, different jargon in the workplace. We use things like team member or team player, employees, corporate culture, values, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, a relationship is purely relating. How am I relating, responding, reacting to people in my space and or the situation, the environment? So I'm going to be talking about two aspects of relationships today. One in terms of the organization perspective and one from an employee perspective. So when it comes to relationship fatigue, what are some of the things that contribute to fatigue, and what we're really seeing now because of the pandemic? A big thing that's our new concern, or should be our new concern, is burnout. A lot of organizations and employees are concerned about burnout and experiencing burnout. And there's three levels or three aspects to burnout. One is exhaustion, that I'm completely overextended. And we're seeing this because of the online back-to-back meetings that we're involved in all the time. And we're seeing it because our personal and our work hours are being blurred. And that there's no boundaries, there's no definitive start and stop to our working day. And in the past, that used to be signaled by us getting up and commuting and going to work. And going to work and coming home from work gave us that boundary. Whereas now we've almost lost that. It's because it's easier to walk from the kitchen, the bedroom, the dining room to wherever our workspace or workstation is, depending on what your home situation, your home environment is. So definitely exhaustion is a big one that we're seeing, and burnout is the biggest concern right now in terms of employees going forward. Cynicism, so a toxic negative environment, and that doesn't necessarily mean corporate culture itself. It can be, but it can also mean from a team perspective, either the team collective as a whole, particular individuals in the team environment, and or from a leadership perspective. And sometimes that can also be as a result of customers and or suppliers or vendors. So negative environment, negative interactions, and some of the research that we've seen is that even one person that has a negative outlook of view can permeate into the rest of the team or start influencing others. So that whole sort of cliche saying about one bad apple makes a whole bag of apples rotten, well, there's some truth in that. And then what we're also seeing in some of the reports that have come out is around professional evaluation, and particularly we're seeing it with women in the workplace, moms, working moms, and women in senior levels working from home, where a lot of the household responsibilities have fallen on moms or women by default, and that they're struggling to juggle with managing home work-life responsibilities and deliver in terms of their workplace deliverables. And some of the reports we're seeing is that women are looking to step down and reduce their working hours and working roles and responsibilities, and in some cases even looking to step out of the workplace environment. And because the underlying factor there is a lot of them feel guilty that they are not coping or delivering the quality that is either they are expecting of themselves or the organization is expecting of them. And so this is contributing in terms of mental, physical, emotional fatigue. So relationship with self, but also relationship with my team, my leader, and also the organization. Long hours without breaks, and there's two different schools of thoughts that are out there. The one research, a lot of research done by Microsoft, they have recommended that a 90-20 principle is effective. So 90 minutes online, 20 minutes offline doing something else. So time to think, time to reflect, time to plan, time to strategize, whatever it might be. And the other school of thought that's coming out now is to build 15-minute breaks in between each meeting. So reducing your meeting hours from 1 hour to 45 minutes or less, and having 15-minute breaks in between to give yourself that break. Whereas in the workplace, we would get up and move from one meeting to another. We would go to the bathroom, past the coffee station, whatever it is. Now, with all these back-to-back meetings, we're not having those breaks, as short as they may have been. So we need to be intentional about creating those breaks by implementing those boundaries. Unrealistic expectations in terms of, well, now that you're at home, you can always be on, and we are always on in different ways. Yes, we're online with our laptops and our devices, but we're also online with the constant notifications that are popping up on our screens, but also on our devices, in other words, our smartphones. Even when we've walked away from our desktops, we're still connected, we're still online, and a lot of people have that need that when they see a notification or an email coming through, I quickly need to respond to this, I quickly need to answer this message or this WhatsApp or whatever it might be. And that's contributing to fatigue as well, because we are always on, we are always connected. We don't have enough downtime. And then not feeling valued or appreciated from an individual level, and this could be from the organization as a whole, but also from a leader, manager, and a team perspective. So my contribution is not being valued, my quality of work is not being valued, the extra mile that I'm going to, or the circumstances that I'm having to operate underneath is coming through as not feeling valued. And then a toxic culture, and this is what we're seeing in a number of different ways. So very topical over the last couple of months has been monitoring software, and how legal and ethical is it, and why are companies using monitoring software to monitor if their staff are online and that they actually are working and that they're not surfing Facebook or internet or whatever it might be. Also micromanaging. A lot of organizations or managers weren't necessarily ready or equipped or intentional about how to manage remotely and in a virtual space. So some have resorted to micromanaging traits and behaviors, and this is causing conflict and confrontation, which does contribute to relationship fatigue. Fatigue as in I'm becoming disengaged, I'm becoming disillusioned, and therefore I am not contributing or being proactive or taking initiative and giving of my best, working at my optimum. And then also around lack of support and support systems in different ways. The very basic is lack of access to resources. So home offices is a big thing, and access to information, so systems and processes and policies and documentation and databases and online places where we can get access to, but also people. Because we're all in back-to-back meetings, maybe I need to bounce ideas off my manager, I need to get in touch with my manager or one of my colleagues, but I just can't get hold of them, they're not replying to my messages, or they're not coming back to me quickly enough, they only come back to me the next day, whatever it might be, and that is also contributing to the fatigue that we're experiencing. Job insecurity, and there's a lot of instability going around at the moment with just the environment. Right now, we're seeing it with the third wave. The last couple of weeks, there's been a definite lull in our organizations, in the workplace, in the environment, in the world at large, as everybody's adopted a bit of a hesitant watch and see what's going to happen, how's it going to affect us. And then obviously with Sunday night, with the lockdown restrictions, it's like, okay, these are the parameters that we now have to work within. So how do we now kind of get back on track and work within those confines as opposed to what we had before? And is it potentially going to be extended again because we've experienced this before and it's our frame of reference, it's our benchmark that we work from? And then with that comes financial insecurity. And when we start talking to employees at a very basic level, that financial security, job security, we go down Maslow's hierarchy. And when our basic survival skills are being threatened, that can also cause a lot of anxiety, and stress is one of the biggest factors and contributors to mental health challenges and sick days. And pre-COVID, the industry, the corporate industry, used to spend 3 billion plus rand a year per annum on sick days or wellness and health and wellness incidences or situations in the workplace. And that the estimate now is that it's probably doubled with COVID. And then lone working. So lone working being, I'm a single person, I live at home alone and I have no one around me. So that loss of interaction and connection and human connection. People that are from a geographical perspective. So let's say that majority of your company or organization is in the Gauteng province and 1 or 2 people are in the Cape or in KwaZulu-Natal, that geographical. So you almost feel like the outsider or the poor distant cousin. And then from a role point of view, your role itself may require you to work on your own quite a lot. So let's say, for example, you're a computer developer or data analyst or something like that, and you have very little interaction because of the nature of your role. So lone working can also contribute to feeling fatigued. And fatigued, as I said, can be mental, it can be physical, it can be emotional, and also just from an energy level perspective and feeling creative and innovative and inspired and being able to be proactive. And so we've seen this contributing to real health issues in terms of disruption to our personal space and our personal lives. So having to work from home, there's a lot of distractions that's happening around us in terms of our home environment. So like John's example just now with the dogs that were barking, we've had to learn to work within that and work around it and do the best that we can. There's also a lot of distractions and disruptions that are happening on the screen. And our brains were not wired to be constantly online and constantly distracted. So it's being referred to as the popcorn brain. That foggy fatigued feeling, so the digital fatigue, it's a real thing, because I'm constantly having to change the focus and my attention to everything that's happening around me. And we are finding that we're being overstimulated in a lot of instances. So that's just setting the scene in terms of what's contributing to relationship fatigue from an organization point of view, from an individual perspective. So going forward, how do we build and sustain this productivity? And the big thing that's coming out now is called what's being referred to as psychological safety, but it's also known as emotional safety at an individual level, at a team level, and at an organizational level. And how do we build that going forward? And so the big thing right now, and in fact, I'm happy to share the results with you. I've just been doing a poll on LinkedIn and on Twitter in terms of what is one of the biggest barriers, one of the biggest barriers to having effective relationships in the workplace. And the biggest thing that's coming out right now is the absence of trust. When people don't feel like they're being trusted, so this talks to the monitoring of people's activities online. It's also talking to micromanaging. It's talking to all of those things. I can't trust my teammates to deliver. I can't trust my leader or manager. I don't feel supported. I don't feel valued by the organization, etc. It talks to all of those things. And so that's the other big thing that's coming out at the moment. So communication is a big thing in relationships. Communication equals connection. Connection equals relational safety. So the space between two people, personal or professional, it doesn't matter, is the space where we relate and respond and react. How are we building that emotional safety? So communication equals connection. Connection equals quality and health of relationships. And that is by the quality and the health of the communication that we're having, which do I feel safe and can I trust this space and this person or persons? So I keep saying to all the people and companies that I work with, you cannot over-communicate right now in terms of where the organization is going, what the strategy is, what you're working on, even if you don't have all the answers. And that's what John alluded to earlier, in terms of being real and being human. You don't have to have all the answers, but at least let people know what's going on. Even if you don't have the answers, and say, we don't have the answers, but right now this is the course of the direction that we're going in, and we want you to come on board with us, and this is what we're able to share with you right now. And as we reassess and review, so will we re-communicate with you. So keep people in the picture all the time, because that helps them feel like they are connected, their input is being valued, they are being appreciated as employees, that you're including them in all the steps along the way. Helping them understand how their job and their role now rolls up and contributes to the bigger picture, and how are they being measured by that. Right now, a lot of companies are grappling around how do we measure productivity versus output? What metrics do we use? What contributes to output? And how do we incorporate that as part of our hybrid working models going forward? And that's another big thing that is going to be a key contributor to attracting talent, but also retaining talent, is what hybrid models are we putting in place? And what does that mean in terms of true flexibility? Another study that's just come out is 65% of employees said that they will continue to stay with an environment or corporate where there is flexibility. In other words, they are given the choice as to when they can work and where they can work from. So if they want to choose to be in the office 2-3 days a week, that's great. Let them choose when. But if we are required to be in the office on specific days, we need to be intentional that those days are around the human component, that we are coming together to communicate, to brainstorm, to reflect, to problem solve, to engage. Because if I'm going to commute to the office to just sit in the office and work behind my laptop like I'm doing at home, then what's the point to it all? So we need to be very intentional about using both online and offline places and platforms in terms of how we're going to engage on a relational level. And then clarity and transparency, openness and honesty, also vulnerability from a business point of view, from a leadership point of view, from an individual point of view. And this is where mental health and wellness or employee structures come into play. It's going to be another key factor in terms of attracting and retaining talent. People are going to be looking to how serious are you about my well-being, and what structures have you put in place for me? How is that being communicated and being kept top of mind? And how am I able to access these resources without being made to feel guilty in the process? And being able to put down healthy boundaries, both from an organization point of view, but also from an individual perspective. Being able to push back and say no. Being aware of schedule clashes. So before we would say that, you know, we would host our team meetings on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. Well, maybe that's not convenient anymore, because now a lot of people are homeschooling kids or having to take care of home responsibilities. Or scheduling meetings between 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon when most people are traveling to school to go and fetch their children. It's unrealistic and it's impractical, and it creates a divide as to those people that are on the outside or the periphery because they're trying to listen while they're driving because they're expected to be online, or they're trying to be engaged and online while they're trying to do something else. So how do we readjust our schedules around our people and the real needs of our people? At the same time, how do we communicate the business's needs, and how do we help people to align, get on board, and be able to understand how their role contributes to that? This is where the transactional aspect happens in terms of the relational space between us. And then the flexibility and adaptability. The big buzzword is resilience. We have to build our resilience muscle. And yes, that's true, but really what it is at the end of the day, and it's also being termed as our adaptability quotient. So like we have in intellectual quotient, emotional quotient, it's being termed as the adaptability quotient. How adaptable can we be as individuals and organizations and teams to the ongoing change that we're experiencing and the uncertainty? Being able to manage our own emotions and our own self-care and regulating routines, as well as from a team collective and an organization collective, and to remain positive and proactive in the process. And that's what contributes to building healthy relationships in the organization. So I hope that's given you some food for thought and some ideas on how to carry those insights together with what John has shared, and to bring in the human aspect of the relationships in the workplace and the human aspect of businesses, which is our key asset right now.
Paula, that was absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much. And I mean, you really do sometimes hear something that just completely resonates, and what you delivered for me today was that story of setting your hour-long meetings to 45 minutes and then starting your next meeting on the hour. And I'm going to discuss that with the team and implement from today, because I think that really, you know, just the idea that I can go get a glass of water and eat something quickly and sort anything out, that's my top learning from today so far. So thank you very much for that. So, you know, we've had this wonderful business and person and relationship insight from John and Paula. We've now got a little bit harder focus with Mehnaaz, just talking about the legal implications of fatigue and where not sustaining the safety in the workplace can actually land us in a little bit of hot water. So that's over to you, Mehnaaz.
Thank you. I think I'm sharing the most difficult topic or the most controversial topic is, what do employers do in circumstances where they're faced with COVID fatigue, which gives rise to misconduct. We're now in a situation where we've been in COVID, we've had COVID-19 for over a year. It's around, people are tired. People are tired of wearing a mask, of social distancing, and we crave human contact. We need human contact. Paula and John have spoken about this, and we want to have that kind of interaction, and losing that interaction actually has an impact on the way we perform our jobs. So we now find ourselves in situations where employees in specific are becoming a bit lax. They are not keeping to COVID-19 protocols. And what do you as an employer have to do to ensure that your workplace is safe? So at the outset, an employer is required to promote and maintain a safe and healthy workplace. That's an obligation on you as an employer. So I know most of us are trying to remote work, but there's many instances where a lot of people are still reporting to their workplace, their actual workplace, physically and interacting with people. So we have to look at these kinds of situations. And last year when the regulations came out and we first started, there was not much to go on. A year later, we have 3 decisions that have come before our tribunals and court that deal with COVID-19 misconduct. I will focus on the Escort Limited versus Quinsee judgment first, and more predominantly than the others, because that's a labor court judgment as opposed to the other 2, which is Bargaining Council and CCMA arbitration awards. Interestingly, before I get into the facts of this case, is all 3 of these cases, the misconduct stemmed from August 2020. So it all happened in the same month. And if you look at the pattern, it seems like everyone got tired around the same point. And each case is very different. And this will go towards the basics of how an employer should handle disciplinary proceedings. But from a COVID perspective, it's this labor court judgment of Escort Limited is a scathing judgment. And what it does is it also says, what more must anyone do to tell people wear masks, keep social distancing from others, be safe? And what more can an employer do? And before I get into the facts of this, I just want you to bear in mind, whatever I'm saying, the labor court even went as far as saying this: it's well and good that employers have fancy COVID-19 protocols on paper, but what are they doing for the follow-through to make sure that the protocols they have on paper is being implemented and being complied with? So this is a judgment of Escort Limited versus Quinsee, and employer operates a national butchery business. I'm sure we all know of Escort Limited. And the employee in question was an assistant butchery manager. So we're not talking about a floor employee, we're talking about someone who is fairly senior, not very senior, but mid-range employee. The employer in this scenario had various COVID-19 policies and procedures in place. Interestingly enough, the employee in question was a part of the committee who established these protocols, and he assisted the company in communicating and creating awareness and putting up flyers and, as part of this committee, creating awareness on the COVID-19 protocols. So this employee traveled with another employee to and from work, as in like a carpool in a private vehicle. The employee who he traveled with then developed COVID-19 symptoms. He was later hospitalized and he tested positive for COVID. Quinsee also started to develop COVID-19 symptoms. He was booked off for a few days in July, and then on 5 August, he went for a COVID-19 test. And why I'm mentioning 5 August is because the timeline here is very critical. He goes for the test, so he's experiencing symptoms. He goes for the test on the 5th of August. He then reports to work on the 7th, 9th, and 10th of August. As normal. His results from his COVID-19 test come back on the 9th of August as positive. So he is positive, he has COVID-19, he comes to work after he's been tested, but more so after he's been positive, after he's received his results as being tested positive on the 9th and 10th. What makes it worse is the employer then at the CCMA presents video footage of this employee who is walking around as the butcher manager, walking around maskless, hugging employees. One of the employees who he hugged in question was an employee who had underwent heart surgery and who was experiencing complications. So it's an employee, as we know, with comorbidities, who's at higher risk and more susceptible of severe illness from COVID-19. So the employer then charges the employee, rightfully so, with gross misconduct and gross negligence. Employee went through a disciplinary hearing and the employer dismissed him. Interestingly enough, and this is where, you know, a lot of wide eyes, raised eyebrows come in. The CCMA Arbitration Award, the commissioner says the dismissal was substantively unfair. And the reason for this is that the commissioner placed a lot of emphasis on the employee's disciplinary code and procedure. And whilst the commissioner acknowledged that the employee's behavior was extremely irresponsible, it said that the disciplinary code and procedure provided that the appropriate sanction was, for gross negligence, was a final written warning. The CCMA found that the employer did not follow its own disciplinary code and procedure, and the employee was reinstated. We get to the labor court, and the employer, obviously unhappy with the CCMA decision, runs off to the labor court on review. The court found that the CCMA's decision was reviewable. What the court actually said is, after listening to the facts and the charge, it was almost a no-brainer. It almost should have been the end of the matter for the commissioner, and he should have upheld the dismissal. But the court went on further, and it said it found that the CCMA's decision was odd in the circumstances. And what it also pointed out, that this employee's behavior was reckless, inconsiderate, nonchalant, and it endangered lives. Because when that employee, after he tested, and more so after he got his results, came to work, he not only endangered his life, but the life of all those he interacted with. But the court took it one step further and said he actually endangered the applicant's operations itself. Because what then happened is, every person who the employee was in contact with was then required to self-isolate, and that put significant pressure on the employer's business. And the court went that far in addressing this concern to say it's not only endangering lives, but endangering livelihood, because you risk your employer's operations at a crucial time. And how the labor court approached this is, it's not just misconduct, it's misconduct within the context of a pandemic. And ultimately, the court said, irrespective of the code and procedure, which is usually a guideline, the dismissal should be upheld. The dismissal was substantively fair, and the commissioner failed to consider the totality of the circumstances, i.e. this being a misconduct in the context of a global pandemic. As I mentioned at the outset, is the court then went on and cautioned employers, saying, don't just have COVID-19 protocols in place on paper. It's nice to have posters up and have these policies and procedures, but make sure that you are proactive ensuring that they are complied with. So for me, I've personally felt that this was a very interesting judgment, because, you know, there's a paragraph in there, and if anyone has a moment to read it, there's a paragraph in there which literally goes on one step further, and it looks like a plea from the court saying, everyone come to the party. What more can anyone do to ensure the safety of themselves and those around them? The next case I want to deal with is Detel versus Quality Express. And this one, an employee was employed as a truck driver. He was dismissed for misconduct, gross misconduct. And in this case, the employee tested for COVID-19. And then he reported to work. Also August, again, so this fits in with the timeline of COVID fatigue. People are tired. They want to return to normalcy. So he failed to notify the employer. He came back to work as normal. And afterwards, he then tested positive. Interestingly, in this case, the contention was, he said that he did not break an actual rule or a workplace rule, and there was no standard established by the employer. The employer at the CCMA, or the bargaining council in this matter, said, we agree, we concede that we do not have a formal COVID-19 protocol in place. There's no rule or standard operating procedure, but we've done our fair share in discussing with staff, putting up flyers, having pre-screening when you enter. And this employee in question can't say there was no rule, because previously, about 2 months prior, he actually isolated for 10 days. So on his own version, he's aware of COVID-19 protocols. And the bargaining council in this matter said, even though there was no written rule or policy, which would have been much easier for the employer to prove its case, but we are living in a pandemic, you know, we have awareness all around us. And considering the dangers of this, we can no longer, and an employee can no longer hide behind ignorance. And what the bargaining council did was that it upheld the dismissal. There's been no movement in this case since this award was made available. So I'm not sure if at this stage it has gone to the Labour Court on review. The last case I want to deal with is also a NUMSA on behalf of Manike versus Wenzani Consulting. And the employee here was dismissed for failing to wear a face mask. And this was a semi-skilled rigger. He was dismissed. He was on the phone. The person couldn't hear him. He pulled down his mask and he had the conversation whilst walking around the workplace. The employer seen him. The employer ultimately held a disciplinary hearing and he was dismissed. It went to the CCMA, but the commissioner here accepted that not wearing a mask was risky. But however, the commissioner found that the dismissal was unfair and that dismissal was too hard a sanction and the employee was reinstated. What is of significance in this case, and I think from the previous case to create the distinction, is the previous case had an element of dishonesty. This one is more of a gross negligence, but also this one was unopposed. The employer didn't put any version forward before the CCMA. All that came before the CCMA was this employee giving his version, showing remorse, saying, I'm sorry, saying I didn't know, saying there was no rules in place. So had the employer actually come on board and opposed this case at the CCMA, I think we might have come up with a different decision. I cannot be certain, but I think that would be one of the things that we need to consider. So what is the takeaways from these? I think as employers, we all need to ensure that we have COVID-19 protocols in place. And we take it one step further to ensure that we have mechanisms in place to ensure that they are being complied with. Our courts are now looking at employer and employee conduct. So you can't be one of those employers who have a policy and then you do nothing about it. You have to be proactive in ensuring compliance.
Mehnaaz, that was great. And I mean, it really is fascinating to hear how quickly legal realities are coming to the fore. You know, that these cases really are playing out in court, and we really do have to combat fatigue, hopefully bringing on board some of the other learnings that we've had in this webinar today. So thank you very, very much. And I can see from comments in the chat that people found those case studies particularly interesting. We've had a couple of questions coming through for our panelists. Suvesh, he's also my neighbor. Hi, Suvesh. Says, there was a recent New York Times article saying that there's no evidence that face-to-face or offline actions interactions foster innovation. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that more companies will come to this conclusion? Do you think this is also true in a learning scenario? So no evidence that face-to-face or office interactions foster innovation. I think that that would be good for both John and Paula. So let's hit John up first, and then we'll move over.
It's a great question, and I think if you think about it, it's hard to say that it does or it doesn't. You know, it depends. I mean, you can remember face-to-face interactions that have really helped you be innovative. If you've got somebody who's really angry looking at you, you're not going to be innovative. If you've got a face-to-face interaction with a whole different tone, where somebody is engaging and open, then you're going to be innovative. So it really depends on the vibe of the office environment. I don't think that's necessarily the only variable. But to think that, you know, that face-to-face interactions create innovation and non-face-to-face ones don't, I think that's a binary. It goes back to my thing about polarities, not either or, it's an and both. So I think that if you manage the face-to-face interaction or the virtual ones well, you can easily get innovative outcomes, or the opposite. If you put sometimes part of innovation as being on your own, you need to retreat, makes sense. You might argue that the first stage of the innovation is to get all the different ideas, and it's like that U theory. You fill yourself up of Otto Scharmer. You fill yourself up with all these ideas to break your kind of, until your brain is spinning. And then you retreat to those quiet moments where there's sort of quiet brain, this sort of subliminal brain, you know, the harebrained tortoise mind, that starts patterning for you. And then these insights start emerging when you're walking or showering, whatever. And then they come from somewhere. And then you need solitude. And then when you start playing with it, you need to come back together again with people. So I think it all depends on how you intelligently use each medium for me.
Great. And now, Paula, your insights?
I think for me, it comes back to the basics of we are wired for connection. We are social creatures. And there were some studies that were done long before COVID came out on, it's called the looming loneliness epidemic. It was done in Australia, UK, and the US. And what they found from that research was that the impact of chronic loneliness on our immune systems was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, making it much more severe than other diseases like obesity. So I think it's more around, yes, we need connection. Yes, we also like time alone and quiet time, depending on your preference and your preferred way of operating and working. But I think it comes down to more the quality of the interactions, because you can have lots of people around you and still feel lonely and alone. It's more around fulfilling and rewarding interactions. And if you're coming into the workplace, how do you create those spaces to have meaningful interactions? Because relationships, personal and professional, provide a source of a structure of support that give us a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, and a sense of feeling valued and appreciated. So if you can incorporate those basic factors, those human factors in your interactions going forward, doesn't have to be, we don't have to go into work just for that. But you need to have snippets and pockets of that, both in person and online, and find a balance that works for you and your people.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Paula. And we're out of time, but I did just get one for Mehnaaz, which I just wanted to just quickly address to her, also from Savesh. Which is, what is the onus of disclosure with regard to COVID status versus the right to privacy? Which is a question I've also been interested, not just in terms of COVID, but in terms of comorbidities, when you have to, for instance, if you have diabetes and you want to not come into the office for that reason on top of COVID, at the same time, I know you're not required to disclose medical conditions. So that's quite an interesting one. Can you do it in a minute or less?
Well, I'll try. I think, firstly, I think that goes more to a health and safety aspect, and we've got a lot of occupational health and safety practitioners who deal with that directly. But if I recall correctly, I believe that there is a requirement to disclose your status in terms of the regulations and the NICD that creates that obligation. So whilst we do have rights and the right to privacy and all of those things, it's not, none of our rights are, sorry, that's not the word. They aren't without limitations. So in certain circumstances, there has to be limitations to it. So I think the legislation requires that disclosure. I can double check and I can post a answer for you once we go offline.
Thanks very much, Mehnaaz. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. You were fantastic. It was such a contentful webinar. We haven't had too much time for questions at the end. But what we will do is that everyone who's asked a question, we've got a note of it, and we will link you up. We have your email address from registration. We'll link you up with the relevant speaker post-webinar to get your question answered. Sorry, John, a little bit extra homework for you.
I'll delegate.
Thank you very much. Sorry?
I'll delegate.
Excellent. Thank you everyone very much. Thanks to our panelists. You were absolutely fantastic. I can see from the chat that people really felt that they gained a lot of value here today. Have a fantastic afternoon.